The moment I walked into the chapel holding my father's real will, the whole room froze, especially my sister, who had just finished telling everyone I wasn't invited. Her wine glass slipped, the silence cracked, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. Hi, I'm Jenna, and if you've ever been the overlooked one in your own family, you might understand why I didn't come to cause drama. I came with the truth. What was in that envelope changed everything, and I promise, this story isn't what you think. Before we jump into the story, if you don't mind, let me know where you're from by leaving a comment below. That way, I can send a special hello your way. Now go ahead, grab yourself a warm cup of water and find a comfy spot. It's time to begin the story. I found out my father had died from a Facebook post. Not a call, not a message, just a quiet announcement between a soup recipe and an ad for car tires. I had paused mid-scroll, expecting nothing more than a cat video or a fall pumpkin bread recipe, but there it was. Remembering Richard Langley, a pillar of our community. Service this Saturday, First Trinity Chapel. Shared by Mrs. Daly, our old neighbor who used to bring over pound cake in Tupperware. I sat back on the couch, heart thudding in a strange, hollow rhythm. For a moment, I thought it might be a mistake, a repost, some weird memory thing Facebook does. But no, comments were pouring in. He will be missed. A true Southern gentleman. Condolences to Victoria and Evelyn. Victoria and Evelyn. Not a single mention of me. I checked my phone, no calls, no texts, just a silent screen reflecting my face in the late afternoon light. I opened the family group chat, the one I hadn't been part of in over a year. It had gone private. Victoria had removed me the day after Mom's birthday dinner. That night had been the last straw. She stood up, glass raised, smiled that perfect sharp smile, and toasted, "The daughter who stayed," while her eyes never left mine. Everyone laughed. I left before dessert. I set my phone down and stared at the window. The apartment was still half unpacked. I'd moved here 6 weeks ago for a freelance UX consulting job that already felt like it might not pan out. Boxes leaned against each other like they were waiting for a better reason to be opened. A breeze pushed through the cracked window, cool and damp with October's moodiness. I pulled the throw blanket tighter around my legs, even though I didn't really feel cold. I felt erased, like I had died too, just quieter. I picked up my phone again and opened a text thread I hadn't used in months. "Jenna, did you see about my dad?" Noah replied a minute later. "Noah? Yeah. I thought you were going to speak?" My hands went still. "Jenna, I wasn't even told." There was a pause. 3 dots blinked, then vanished. Then came his reply. "Noah, I'm sorry. I didn't know. I just assumed. Assumed I would be invited to my own father's funeral. Assumed I was still a daughter worth contacting." I stared at the ceiling, listening to the low hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of a clock that was still set to the wrong time zone. And then I remembered the envelope. 2 years ago, on a trip home that ended in one of our usual tense silences, my father had stopped me at the front door. "Take this," he'd said, tucking something into my tote bag. "Just, if anything happens." I never opened it. I'd pushed it into the back of a drawer, assuming it was an old photo or a birthday check he forgot to sign, the kind of token gesture he was good at when words failed him. I got up, walked to the drawer in my desk, and pulled it out. The envelope was thick, heavy. My name in his blocky handwriting. Inside was a single document. Legal stationery, a revised will, signed, notarized, dated 6 months after the one Victoria had waved around during that Easter dinner in 2022, the one where I'd asked too many questions and was met with, "You wouldn't understand how trusts work." I read every line slowly. My name was there, clear and unmistakable, co-executor, partial heir, equal to Victoria, not the kind one, not the creative drifter, just equal. I sat down hard on the edge of my bed, the will resting in my lap like it carried weight beyond ink and signature. My father had seen something. Maybe not perfectly, maybe not soon enough, but he had seen it, and he'd chosen to write it down. A memory came back to me. Him at the kitchen table, glasses low on his nose, fiddling with a crossword puzzle. I was 17, angry at the world and failing pre-calculus. He handed me a mug of tea and said, "You don't have to win every argument, but don't let them write you out of the story." I didn't understand what he meant back then. I think I do now. I looked at the open envelope again, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel ashamed. I felt called. Not by guilt or obligation, but by the simple fact that I was still here, and my name was still mine. I picked up my laptop and booked a one-way flight to Savannah. No seat selection, no checked bag, just a carry-on, the will, and a worn black coat that didn't quite fit anymore. Let them be shocked. Let them whisper. Let them look me in the eye and pretend I never mattered. Because this time, I wasn't going as a guest. I was going as a daughter who had never left, only been left out. The church doors swung open, and for a moment, I thought even the light hesitated to let me in. The air was thick with rose oil and dust. My heels clicked against the marble tile, louder than I expected. Heads turned, just a few at first, then more. A soft murmur rolled through the pews like someone had dropped a plate in the middle of a prayer. I kept walking. First Trinity Chapel hadn't changed. Same dark wood, same stained glass windows, with saints who looked more annoyed than holy. The front rows were packed. People I hadn't seen in years. Some I'd grown up with. A few tilted their heads, trying to place me. One woman, I think she used to teach Sunday school, nudged her husband. He glanced at me, then quickly looked away. Victoria stood at the pulpit. Of course she did. Hair swept into a perfect chignon. Navy dress, pearls. Her voice was calm, measured. He was a man of few words, she said, but those of us who knew him best knew how much weight those words carried. She didn't glance in my direction. Not once. I slid into the back pew, next to a potted ficus that looked like it had seen better days. I was out of frame, just close enough to count as present, not welcome. A familiar heat crept up my chest, the kind that made you feel 12 again, like the day Victoria told the drama teacher I had bad projection, then smirked when I was reassigned to curtain duty. I scanned the crowd. My mother sat in the second pew, a step behind Victoria in black silk and a brooch I'd never seen before. She kept her eyes forward, hands clasped, jaw tight. Noah was there, too, a few rows behind her, giving me a small, almost imperceptible nod. I nodded back, but the truth was, I felt like I had walked into a play halfway through. Everyone already knew their lines. I was just the lighting glitch. When the eulogy ended, the organ hummed softly. A few guests dabbed at their eyes. Victoria stepped down gracefully and folded into her seat like the whole thing had cost her nothing. I stayed seated while others rose for the recessional. People filed out, murmuring condolences, the way polite Southern folks do when they don't know what else to say. A few looked at me with puzzled politeness. One woman gave a brief, closed-lip smile like she'd just mistaken me for someone else. I waited until the aisle cleared before standing. In the adjacent hall, a long table was set with finger sandwiches, lemon bars, and pitchers of sweet tea, crystal serving dishes, napkins with gold trim. No one looked my way as I approached the table. They didn't avoid me. They just absorbed me into the wallpaper. At the drink table, I reached for a paper cup. Behind me, someone whispered, "She wasn't invited. Why is she even here?" I didn't turn around. I just poured the tea slowly and focused on keeping my hands steady. The sugar crystals at the bottom caught the light. I stirred without drinking. The silence around me wasn't empty. It was precise, measured, as if everyone had silently agreed I would not exist unless I forced them to see me. And I was just about to do that when she approached, Victoria. She moved like she always had, smooth, deliberate, like every room was already hers, and she was just doing the rest of us a favor by being there. She stopped exactly 2 feet from me, enough for space to feel like a threat, not an option. "You're not part of this, Jenna," she said. Her voice was soft, but her smile was the same one she used when she won the school spelling bee and corrected the teacher on stage. "Don't humiliate yourself." I took a sip of the tea. It was too sweet, just like everything else in this room. I reached into my bag and pulled out the envelope. Her eyes flicked to it instantly. "Dad left this for me," I said. "It's the updated will." The chatter near the doorway quieted. Not completely, but enough. I could feel it, the tilt of the room shifting, the invisible pause in every breath. The tea in my cup trembled slightly as I held it in one hand, the envelope in the other. Victoria's smile didn't waver, but her eyes, they narrowed, just a fraction. "You brought that here?" she asked. "It's real," I said. "It's signed, witnessed. It names me." She stepped closer, her breath carrying the sharp tang of red wine and mint. Then she leaned in, voice low enough that only I could hear. "Then let's hear it," she said. "Let's see how far you're willing to embarrass yourself." I didn't flinch. I didn't back down. But I knew in that moment that this wasn't going to be quiet anymore. I'd never heard a room go from sacred to stunned so quickly. All it took was a signature and a seal. We were still standing by the refreshment table. Lemon bars half bitten, sweet teacups sweating on linen. The room was humming with post-funeral murmurs. And then, just like that, everything slowed. Bernard Keller adjusted his glasses and looked down at the document in his hand. He wasn't a dramatic man. I'd known him since I was a kid. He'd handled the closing on our first house, and later, the paperwork when Dad refinanced. He was the kind of lawyer who used fountain pens and still kept a leather briefcase. "This is dated 6 months later than the one I received," he said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. I didn't move. My hands were steady now, resting at my sides. Bernard glanced at the notary stamp, then at the attached witness sheet. He tapped it once, almost absently. "2 signatories," he said aloud. "Cousin Amy Langley and Dennis Bishop, both valid Georgia notaries. And—" he looked up, voice sharpening. "These appear legitimate." Amy stepped forward from the edge of the crowd. She looked nervous, pale, fidgeting with the hem of her sleeve. But she nodded. "I remember that day," she said. "It was after Sunday dinner. He said he wanted to revise things, said he was tired of assumptions." Victoria was already moving before Amy had finished her sentence. "This is absurd," she snapped. "Forged documents, pulled out of a coat pocket after the funeral?" She turned to Bernard. "You're not seriously considering this, are you? My father had a full estate plan, signed, notarized, and properly filed with your office." "He did," Bernard said. "But that version is dated January 2022. This one is August 4th. The law requires the most recent authenticated will be honored, assuming it's not proven fraudulent." "And you just assume this isn't?" Her voice had risen a full octave. Bernard didn't flinch. Instead, he reached into his briefcase and removed a second sheet, a printout folded neatly in thirds. "I received this email from your father last fall," he said. "He notified me that he intended to revise his estate plan and said he would be mailing the updated copy to my office. It appears he never did, but the email mentions both witnesses by name and references a notary appointment." He passed the sheet to Victoria, who snatched it and skimmed furiously. Her mouth tightened, but she said nothing. The room was quiet now, but not empty. It was the kind of silence that sits in your chest. A few guests shifted uncomfortably. Someone coughed. A napkin dropped to the floor and fluttered there, untouched. Noah stood just behind the second table, arms crossed, watching. His eyes flicked between me and the will, but he didn't speak. I could feel the change happening, not loudly, not with applause or vindication, just shift. People who hadn't looked at me all day were now whispering to each other. One woman leaned toward her husband, eyes wide. Someone else mouthed my name. Evelyn hadn't moved. She sat beside the urn, hands folded so tightly her knuckles were bone white. Her eyes weren't on me or Bernard or Victoria. They were on the carpet, blank and unfocused. Bernard cleared his throat. "As of today," he said, voice firm but even, "Jenna Langley is co-executor and partial beneficiary of Richard Langley's estate, per his most recent written directive." I didn't smile. I didn't need to. The words settled into the room like a gavel. Victoria's jaw clenched. She reached for her wine glass too quickly, and it slipped. Red liquid spilled across the white linen, blooming into a dark stain that spread like a slow-motion wound. She gasped, more at the silence than the spill, then stared at me with a kind of fury that had nothing to do with grief. "She planned this," she said, her voice sharp, trembling. "She planned all of it." No one rushed to wipe the table. I watched the wine soak into the fabric, creeping toward the stack of untouched napkins, and thought of the hospital years ago, when Dad had pneumonia and I stayed 3 nights on that cracked vinyl couch. Victoria never showed, but she posted Bible quotes every morning. Prayers up, y'all. Now she looked at me like I was the traitor. Truth has a strange way of rearranging the furniture in a room. People don't gasp, they recalibrate. They turn slightly in their chairs. They stop interrupting. A woman I barely knew stepped forward and touched my arm lightly. "He always spoke kindly of you," she said. "I'm sorry I didn't know." I nodded. I didn't know what else to say. Maybe I didn't need to say anything at all. Sometimes justice doesn't arrive with a crash. It slips in with a paperclip and a quiet witness who remembers dinner after church. Sometimes the loudest people are just good at filling space, while the truth waits its turn. Victoria stood perfectly still, the stain at her side darkening. She wasn't looking at me anymore, and for the first time in years, I didn't care. It didn't take a raised voice, just a date on a signature to make the whole room blink twice. The mood had changed, but no one said it out loud. They didn't have to. You could feel it in the way people paused mid-conversation, in the quiet shifting of bodies near the refreshment table. Even the light filtering through the stained glass had softened, like the chapel itself was catching its breath. Victoria stood a few feet from the wine stain she'd created, lips parted but no sound coming out yet. The red had spread wide across the white cloth, leaking into the napkin pile like it meant to swallow the silver tray beside it. She finally found her voice. "This is manufactured," she said. "That will. That email. It's all a setup." Bernard didn't look up. He was refolding the documents with the kind of slow care that only made her angrier. "It's legally binding," he said simply. "The notary stamp is verified. The witnesses are present. The directive is clear." Victoria pointed at me. "You just showed up out of nowhere, with paperwork, no lawyer, and now we're all just supposed to believe you." I didn't say a word. Somewhere near the front pews, Cousin Amy stepped back, her expression uneasy. Mr. Whitney, a longtime neighbor and retired pharmacist, turned toward me and offered a polite, almost apologetic nod. That was new. Evelyn hadn't spoken all day, but now, without moving much, she spoke. "He told me he was changing it," she said. Her voice cracked on the last word. "I just didn't think he'd actually do it." Victoria's head snapped toward her. "You knew?" "I didn't see the document," Evelyn said quickly, looking down. "He mentioned it one night, after dinner. I thought he was angry, just venting. I didn't know he went through with it." Her fingers clutched at the edge of her silk shawl like she was holding on to something heavier than fabric. I remembered that shawl. It had belonged to our grandmother. Victoria used to say it made Mom look graceful even when confused. Now she just looked small. Aunt Claire walked over to me. "He left you the garden sketchbook, didn't he?" she asked gently. "The one he always carried in his coat pocket?" I nodded. "He trusted you," she said, almost like it surprised her to realize it out loud. From the far end of the room, Noah leaned against the wall, arms crossed. He hadn't moved much, but I could see the way he was watching everything, carefully, like a witness more than a participant. When our eyes met, he gave a small nod, not approval, not encouragement, just presence. Victoria turned toward the front of the room and stepped up to the podium like she had earlier during the eulogy. Her hands shook slightly as she reached for the microphone. "There's context," she said loudly. "None of you know what really happened. He was confused. He said things sometimes that didn't make sense." Bernard gently stepped forward. "Victoria," he said, "the service is over." "This isn't the time." She ignored him. "I was the one who managed his appointments, his meds, his mail. I was the one who paid the taxes when he couldn't even remember where the checkbook was." She gripped the sides of the podium tighter. "You all think this piece of paper proves something? He was old, he was tired, and she pointed at me again, was never around." Her voice was rising now. Some guests looked away. Others pretended to tidy up their plates. Bernard stepped beside her and placed a hand near the mic. "Let's wrap this up." Victoria let go of the podium with a sharp exhale, as if she'd finally realized no one was following her anymore. She picked up her coat. It slipped from her grasp and fell to the ground. She didn't pick it up. Then she turned and walked out. The echo of her heels across the marble floor was sharp at first, then faded. No one called after her. No one moved. I stood still, not victorious, just steady. Because the truth doesn't always feel like triumph. Sometimes it lands heavy, like something you've carried so long you forgot how much it weighed until it shifted. I glanced toward Mom. Evelyn wasn't looking at me. She was staring at the chapel doors, lips parted, eyes unfocused, like she was the one who'd just been left behind. Grief comes in strange colors. That night, it looked like a pale blue envelope sealed with shaking hands. I sat by the window of the Airbnb, a small cottage tucked 2 blocks from Forsyth Park, where the Spanish moss trembled with a soft drizzle. The lamplight above the table glowed amber against the hardwood floor. It made everything feel a little older, like the past had slipped inside with me. The envelope had been tucked behind the will, a separate note with no legal bearing, just his handwriting on the front. "Read this when you're alone." I held it for a while. Let it rest in my hands the way someone might hold a photograph they aren't ready to look at yet. When I finally slid my finger beneath the flap, the paper inside unfolded like it had been waiting. "Jenna, I don't know when you'll read this. I don't know what the room looked like when you did, or how she spun it, or who stayed quiet. But I do know this. I'm sorry. You've spent too long thinking I didn't see you, that I agreed with the way they measured your worth. I didn't, but I let them speak louder, and that's on me. I knew what Victoria did, not always in detail, but I knew the shape of it. I knew you brought ideas that were dismissed until she repeated them. I knew your name left off the credits. I knew, and I said nothing. I told myself I was keeping the peace. Truth is, I was afraid she'd do to me what she did to you, turn the room against me. You deserved better than that. You don't owe anyone a performance. You don't need to stay at the table just because someone handed you a seat. Make your own. And if you need to walk away knowing you didn't fail. You just stopped waiting to be chosen. Don't make enemies out of memories. Just do something better with yours. Dad. I read it twice. The second time slower, like tracing over an old scar to feel if it still hurts. Years ago, I had made him a birthday card, cut construction paper, wrote a little poem. I found it in the trash a week later, unopened. I never asked why. I just stopped making cards after that. Now here I was, 34, sitting under a rental lamp with his words finally open in my hands. Not just an apology, but an admission, and something else. A strange, quiet release. There are wounds that fade, and there are wounds that simply stop bleeding. That letter didn't erase the years, but it made the silence less hollow. A knock at the door pulled me back. I slipped the letter into the envelope and tucked it under a book. It was Noah, holding a takeout bag in one hand and a bottle of ginger beer in the other. "I figured you hadn't eaten," he said. He didn't hug me, didn't try to guess what expression was on my face. He just stepped inside, set the bag on the table, and opened the containers. Fried rice, roasted vegetables, some kind of warm apple pastry wrapped in parchment. We sat on opposite sides of the small table. "Did you see the mess Victoria made at the church?" I asked. He gave a half smile. "Yeah, I also saw how you didn't flinch." I broke off a piece of the pastry. "I wanted to," I admitted. We didn't talk much after that, just the soft sounds of eating, the occasional clink of a fork. It was the kind of silence that felt safe, not empty, just breathable. When he left, he didn't say, "Call me if you need anything." He just said, "Lock the door behind me." And that meant more. It was close to midnight when the phone buzzed. Mom. I let it ring once, twice, then answered. Her voice came through small, like she was speaking from a closet. "I didn't stop her because I didn't know how," she said. No greeting, no preamble. I didn't say anything. I thought if I stayed quiet, things would stay intact, that if I didn't take sides, you'd both somehow come out okay. She paused. I could hear a soft rustle, like she was wrapping a blanket around herself. "You didn't deserve that," she said, "and I'm sorry. Not just today. For a long time." There was no excuse, no redirect, just those two sentences suspended in the dark. I nodded into the silence, though she couldn't see it. "Thank you," I said, my voice rough. We didn't say goodbye. We just hung up. Two women who had finally run out of excuses not to speak the truth. I sat for a long time after the call ended. The cottage was quiet. Outside, the rain had slowed to a hush. Somewhere in the distance, a car rolled through puddles, headlights briefly flickering across the window glass. I reached for the letter again, smoothed its edges. Then carefully, I folded it once, tucked it back into the envelope like a bruise I had stopped pressing. I thought justice would feel louder, but the real victory was how quiet everything became inside me. Downtown Savannah had that kind of late autumn light where the streets looked like they were holding their breath. I walked past moss-draped oaks and shuttered antique shops, the wind pressing gently against my coat like it had something to say, but no urgency to say it. Bernard's office was tucked into the second floor of a brick building with frosted glass windows and a rusted elevator that hadn't worked since Clinton. I climbed the stairs slowly. Not because I was tired, but because I didn't need to rush anymore. He stood as I walked in, smoothing the front of his vest and offering me a smile that wasn't warm exactly, but it was honest. "I've finalized the addendum," he said, gesturing to a thick envelope. "If you'd like, I can file it with the court on Monday." I nodded and signed where he pointed. The pen didn't shake in my hand this time. "You're listed as full executor now," he added. I paused. "Change it," I said. "Make it joint." His brow rose just slightly. "Shared power keeps people honest," I said, meeting his eyes. He nodded slowly. "Understood." He handed me a copy of the paperwork. I tucked it into my bag alongside the shadow box I hadn't told anyone about. As I stood to leave, he cleared his throat. "Your father left a line I don't think he meant to sound poetic," Bernard said, "but it stuck with me." He pulled a note from his drawer and read it softly. "I hope she remembers I saw her, especially when I stayed silent." I didn't trust my voice, so I nodded and walked out into the morning sun, which had finally cracked through the gray. Noah was already waiting at the cafe. He'd picked a spot near the railing where the park stretched out in its fall hush. The table wobbled slightly when I set my coffee down, and he stuffed a folded napkin under one leg without breaking conversation. "They've already replaced the flowers at the church," he said. "Marigolds this time." I looked out toward the square. Seasonal upgrade. We split a cinnamon roll and shared scrambled eggs. It wasn't celebratory. It was grounding. He leaned back in his chair. "So, what now?" I took a sip of coffee. It was bitter, but the kind that gets better after the second mouthful. "Something mine," I said. He smiled. Didn't ask what that meant. On the walk back, I wandered alone. The wind picked up slightly, scattering leaves along the sidewalk like an afterthought. I passed a narrow storefront with paper in the windows and a handwritten sign taped to the inside of the glass. For lease, inquire within. The door was locked, the windows dusty, but behind the veil of neglect I saw shelves, empty, waiting. I stepped closer, cupping my hands around my eyes to look in. The space wasn't big, but it had light. Space. Bones. I stood there a long time. Later that afternoon, I returned to the Airbnb and pulled the shadow box from my bag. Inside it, I laid 2 items side by side, the original will and his letter. I didn't hang it on the wall. I didn't frame it for display. I set it gently on the bottom shelf of the bookcase, beneath a stack of notebooks and beside a candle that smelled faintly of eucalyptus. It wasn't a trophy. It was a receipt. Proof that I had walked into the room, not to be welcomed, but to be counted. That evening, Mom texted me. Just a photo. The garden Dad used to tend in the backyard. The sun was hitting the azaleas in that way Savannah knows how to do, low and golden, like it forgives everything it touches. Whenever you're ready, the message read. We can walk it together. I stared at the screen, then turned it face down on the table. Maybe in spring. Before bed, I jotted something in the notebook I kept near my suitcase. I didn't win, I didn't lose, I reclaimed. Sometimes that's more than enough. Outside, a breeze moved through the oaks, and for once I didn't brace against it. I just let it move through me. Some victories don't echo through a room. They settle quietly inside you, like peace finally finding its shape. For me, it wasn't about taking back a seat at the family table. It was about realizing I didn't need one to begin with. Sometimes the hardest truth is this. Love doesn't always come wrapped in the words we hoped for, and silence doesn't always mean someone wasn't watching. But if we stop waiting to be chosen and start choosing ourselves, the story shifts. If this journey stirred something in you, a memory, a moment, a truth you once held quietly, I hope you'll share it. I'd love to hear how you've built your own table, too.